Welcome back to another episode of the Legacy Builders podcast. I'm your host, Kyle McGee. Today, I'm sitting down with a man who quite literally moves earth for a living and does it with eternal impact in mind. Ryan Schmitt is the founder and CEO of Petticoat Schmidt, a heavy civil construction company in Jacksonville, Florida, that's grown into a major player while staying people first and deeply grounded in values. He's led through insane pressure, big swings, and some painful losses along the way. But what stands out most is how he fights to win at home, win at work, and keeps his faith at the center of it all. In this conversation, we're going to dig into how Ryan integrates faith, family, and business, the mindset that's carried him through the toughest seasons, the non-negotiable habits that keep him sharp, and how he honors God in the way he leads. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan and I met in a group that we're a part of called Elevated back in, I guess that was September, out in California, and had a chance to sit down and kind of hear and share a little bit both about our stories, and we instantly connected. And during the conversation, I said, got to have you on the podcast. We got to regurgitate the same conversation. So here's our attempt at that. So you have an amazing story, one filled with highs and lows. Can you share with the listeners just a little bit about your business background and then what you're currently up to today?
Yeah. So my background, my entire career, I've been in the heavy civil construction business. The company that I own, Petticoat Schmidt, we are a heavy civil construction firm that, we build public infrastructure, roadway, utilities, water and wastewater treatment plants, as well as private site development projects, single family, multifamily, and commercial or industrial type site work. And, I've been in that my whole career. It's been over 35 years. I hate to say that out loud. I don't feel that old, but I guess the numbers prove that I am. But pretty much been doing that for my whole career. Worked for another company for 17 years. And then, 18 years ago, left and started my own company by buying a company called Petticoat Contracting. And basically set up the new company honoring the lady who owned that company, kept the Petticoat name and just set up Petticoat Schmidt, like I said, 18 years ago. And I've been growing ever since. We're based out of Jacksonville, Florida. And, we're kind of within about a 300-mile radius. It takes us a little bit into the panhandle of Florida and up into Georgia and a little bit of South Carolina. And we got about 380 employees currently.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so one of the things you'll learn in this quick hour of listening to Ryan is he's extremely humble, and you would never know at the outset, that he's got a company with 300 something employees. Now take us back to 2007. So what was happening in your life that made you say, I'm going to buy this company and build this company my way?
Yeah, like I said, I had worked for another person for many years. And, while I had a lot of entrepreneurial opportunity being essentially the number two guy, I completely appreciated and valued the risks that come with employee or come with ownership. But for whatever reason, after 17 years, the owner of that company and I did not see things eye to eye. And I realized that, that change in perspective and alignments and priorities were just something I wasn't prepared to stay with. And so I departed and figured, I can do this on my own. I can do it better. I can do it the way I want to do it. I didn't have a plan of what, I just knew I was going to do it on my own. And then I had an opportunity. The person who owned the company that I wound up buying, I had known for many years, sharp lady. She was a leader in our industry and some local associations. So I knew her, and she was looking for an exit opportunity, and I was looking for my opportunity. So we kind of got together and came up with a unique ownership transition because it was right during the Great Recession. So when you're looking at not much work out there and doing something like that, like an acquisition, on the face, it doesn't make sense. But when the timing gives you the timing, right, you make it work. And we came up with a pretty unique structure that allowed me basically to buy the assets and hire her people as I needed, and then just get started out and just kind of we grinded our way through the early days of the recession. Right, we were lean and mean. We had 20 some odd people that I brought over, and we were 100% utilized because I didn't have to buy her all her assets. Whatever I didn't buy, I had a first right of refusal on all of her assets, and the things I didn't buy, she sold, at auction or someone else. And so whatever I did buy, I was certain it was going to get 100% utilization. And so we were pretty lean and mean during those days. And, we eked our way through the Great Recession at the time and actually did pretty well. And then came out of that and was able to expand and grow the company. And, as we did, I, kind of go into the next phase of my journey. I was at that point, it was like, man, don't really have this entrepreneurial headwind, other than just being lean and mean. We did pretty well. And, I was like, man, this is not too bad, right? Where's this big headwind? Where's this pressure that you hear about? And well, mine came a little later in my journey, and that was about 2016. And we had grown. We were probably just over 200 people and doing roughly about 60 million in work. And we had a couple big jobs that hit some difficult challenges on the jobs, some things that like differing site conditions or bad design. And unfortunately, all three of those jobs had owners that were just not willing to work with us and live up to their obligation of the contract, and basically said, well, file a claim and keep working. And we did. And it cost us millions and millions and millions of dollars to get through those jobs. And we prevailed in principle. We were right, and we knew we were right going into it. And, like what happens a lot, they settled, they didn't want to go to court. Well, let's settle. Right. But when you settle for 30 cents on the dollar, you got to make that. Do you go to court? Do you spend all this money paying attorneys and court fees, or do you just settle and walk away? Well, we settled and walked away, but it cost us dearly. I was, forced to. It was a tough time because it was, I basically sold everything I had at that point. If it had any amount of equity and I could sell it, I sold it. If I could take a mortgage against it, I took a mortgage against it. Went deep into the line of credit, maxing it out, refinanced our entire fleet of equipment. I had a good friend and colleague of mine who was a member of our, at that time I was in Vistage, business peer group, not unlike the Platinum Elevate group we're in now, Kyle. But anyhow, and he offered me a loan that helped out tremendously. But that loan required me to hand over my stock certificate of the company, as well as mortgage the house that I owned that my parents were living at the time. So, there was some risk there too. I lose that. And, there's some big challenges there.
Stop right here for a second. I'd like to go deep, because this is, what so many people like to gloss over this. Like, and you have aspiring entrepreneurs, and, when you're looking at someone's world from the outside, all you see is what people want you to see. Right. So it's the websites, it's the LinkedIn posts, it's all the good things. Right. And it's like this entrepreneurial like dystopia that it's like everything's great. And this guy's got everything. He has these great vacations and he lives in a big house and great life. But once you get into the root of people's stories, the greatest entrepreneurs, the people that have done the greatest things in their life, have these like back against the wall seasons, moments, challenges that are just like most people cave, right? And you even coined this phase of your life, and you have you call it something. What do you call this time of your life?
Yeah, the Valley of Darkness. That's
Valley of Darkness. Where did that come from? Like, how did you decide to coin this time, Valley of Darkness?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess just having spoken about it so much and, going back and look through it, I don't know if there was any one inspiring moment that made me think about that, but I just, it was actually just describing it. It was like, oh man, it was just like because you just didn't know, right? You just had no idea that you were going to come out on the other side. And, kind of our profits were like a valley, right? It was like, bam, 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 and
Yeah.
you look at that and, the worst part was about 2018 where we actually lost about $5 million. And on each side of that year, we essentially broke even. And so, and to your point, yeah, it's like every day in my mindset is like, okay, wake up, put my feet on the floor next to the bed and just walk into the punch. I mean, I literally said that day after day after day, walk into the punch. I got to solve this problem, right? From figuring out how to generate cash, to pump cash into the company, to solve the issues on the jobs that went so poorly. And I use the analogy of a nosediving 747, smoke and fire coming out of the backside of it and trying to repair it before it hits ground, and then, just bring that nose back up. And that's day in and day out what it was all about. And, from refinancing everything, selling anything. And quite honestly, it's like, for a long time, I told no one. I stared at the ceiling every night, just wondering how I'm going to get through this. Started getting some pretty significant chest pains, of which I'm thinking, I'm like, holy cow, what's going on? Am I, do I have a health concern? And literally, when I'm cutting everything to the bone within the business, I've got this key man life insurance on me. I'm like, well, how much of that premium can I cut without compromising in the event that I need it? I don't want to leave my family with zero. At least, have the proceeds from that life insurance. But, those are the type of things that I'm thinking about. So, like I said, the longest time I was telling no one, and not even my wife. And then, I had a meeting with my Vistage group again. I mentioned them, and and this is where I learned the power of peer groups, but be able to tell them, I'm like, guys, man, this is what it is, and I don't see any end in sight, and I'm worried I might lose it all. And kind of had an emergency meeting with them, and they said, well, have you told your wife yet? Have you told Jill? I'm like, I haven't told anyone. You guys are the first one I've told. And they're like, well, you need to go home and tell her, and then we're going to meet again, and we're going to talk about what we're going to do. And so out of that meeting is when, I went home and told my wife, and told her, hey, we could lose it all. And she's like, well, as long as we got each other, that's all that matters. And which obviously was a great thing to hear. And then, out of that meeting also is when I met with my friend in that group that helped me with a substantial loan. But that was the beginning of still multiple years of, okay, how am I going to generate more cash? How am I going to get through these jobs, get them done, get out of them, and, just figure all this out.
So then, I don't want to stay here too long because, I do know that there's more to the story, but I think that this could be some of the most impactful, and that's why you tell it, right? Because, it is inspiring and motivating to say, hey, we were really back against the wall, and we did, come on the other side. But I want to get into, because what I'm hearing, because my question is, when you get punched in the mouth by life or business, what's that internal conversation with yourself, and how do you get out of it? And I think that what I'm hearing is a lot of it comes back to relationships and people, right? So Vistage, you had a close, tight-knit group where you could open up and verbalize, get out of your head what's actually the problem. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So this is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Then having the support system of your wife, which is imperative. Behind every great man or woman is a stronger man or woman, right? Behind them in their corner. And so, but specifically in the mindset, because as leaders, you're looked up to. You have 200 employees. You're probably having to lay people off. You're losing money, people from the outside looking in. But you still have to come in and portray a different image, right, of someone that isn't freaking out or scared or worried, and you've just been looking at the ceiling all day, completely worried. So talk me through some of these internal conversations or what things were you doing to help coach your own mindset?
Yeah, so great question. And before I get into that, just to add a little bit more about relationships and to compound the issue is, during this process, we lost our bonding, and we had doing $60 million a year at the time. So, and 90% of our jobs required bonds, and we had a meeting with my agent and the surety. And we kind of laid out what was going on, obviously, very clear and transparent, but also what the plan was. And, I thought the meeting went pretty good. And then I got a call from my agent later in the day, and they said, well, they dropped you. I'm like, are you serious? I mean, they never called me. They never said anything. And then even my agent, who I carried over from the prior owner, he didn't come with any solutions. He was like, yeah, we're kind of done. And, zero help, zero, like, let's dive in. I called a good friend of mine who was a bonding agent, and I told him where I was, and he's like, I'll be in your office tomorrow. And we cobbled together he had a small little surety line that he owned, cobbled together like $1 or $2 million worth of surety. And we started trying to bid unbonded stuff. And then we gradually were able to get a little bit more bonding, a little bit more over the course of a couple of years. But it's just a testimony of like the people who just kind of dropped you and turned your back versus those who leaned in and helped out. And, it's kind of crazy. The one I'd been paying and had the relationship.
You still have that same insurance today.
Yeah, exactly. The guy who helped me out. Yeah. He's got my business. Yeah. Just locked in. And the other one, I still see around every now and then. I'm like, but anyhow, the power of relationships. But going to your point about the mindset. Yeah. I learned quickly, like, despite having all those concerns and fears and challenges that I was thinking about, I had to fix my face, right? I couldn't walk around the office. And I heard that one time, one of the people that was, we worked with and still do to this day. And she's like, Ryan, is everything all right? I'm like, oh yeah, everything's fine. She's like, well, it doesn't show on your face. And I'm like, ooh, I gotta be aware of that. And I can't show up feeling defeated or feeling concerned. I had to be positive. I had to show, that there was nothing wrong. But that also led me to, as I transitioned and we kind of leveled that plane, right? We weren't nosediving anymore. I'm like, all right, what am I learning here? And what am I doing moving forward? And how am I going to help grow and fix this? And that's when I leaned into transparency. We started practicing EOS, made popular by the book Traction, and then The Great Game of Business, where we really leaned into open book management. I'd always been kind of open book, but just with my leadership team. But man, we opened the books to the whole company. I thought, do I let people know actually how bad it is? And my thought was like, well, I don't want them to think it's any worse than it really is. And so, we went completely open book, and I said, yeah, this is how bad it is, but this is where we're going. Here's the plan. This is how we're going to fix it. And this is how we're going to build a company out of this. And, I use the thought process and the analogy of like, all right, well, between the actual losses we incurred and then the opportunity losses, essentially, because those were decent times when we should have been making good profits. And, it was about a $20 million impact. And so my thought was like, all right, looked up how much does it cost to go to Harvard these days? All right, that's about equivalent to 100 Harvard grads. And I got to get busy being smarter than 100 Harvard graduates. And what am I going to do to do that? And what am I going to do to make up, learn from this and then make it all up? And, as opposed to just hanging my head and, looking for fault, I'm like, nope, we're going to learn from this. This is going to be the best tuition. And so that's when we leaned into some of these systems between EOS and the Great Game of Business. And then, just consumed books, anything about business, about turning around a business, about building systems, cultures, anything and everything. Even worked with some consultants, listened to podcasts, and it just got really busy on what we're going to do differently. And, it revolved a lot about transparency and just showing the actual truth where we are, but the destination of where we're going and then how to get there. And, we never lost anyone during that. Fortunately, we needed people because we had to build other jobs, and we had to build the jobs even though they were losing. So we couldn't afford to lay off anyone because we had to get the jobs done. Even though we were losing money, we couldn't cut people, and we didn't. And no one left, which is a real, it's a real blessing, and it's a testament to, just those people that, could have left because other companies were paying bonuses at the time because times were good. And, we were not only not paying bonuses, I mean, we were showing these big losses in the company, and, we were not the picture of health. It was, I was like, man, I was so grateful. And to this day, I'm so grateful for the loyalty. But that only put fuel on the fire of trying to fix it and build just a unique and different company, which ultimately led us to one, continue to be transparent. We share the profits of the company. And we share it every week of what that looks like when we share the financials. And then ultimately going to employee ownership, which, fast forward till 2024, when I sold 30% of the company to the employees through an ESOP, with the ultimate goal of going 100% probably by 2028, 2029, somewhere in there. So that, that learning and implementing all those things from the lessons learned, the Valley was our big why. Why do we work so hard on these processes, and why do we really double down? Is like, well, we've lived, what it can mean when you don't have processes, when you don't have the right people and the right seats and the right processes. So it was that.
I want to go deep on and ask more about the ESOP, because I think that's something that's very unique to you and what you've done with the company, and to kind of reward those people that stuck it out and, have really helped make the company that you've created today. One thing that I want to point out and pull out is the importance of your visionary leadership in that role, right? Because when a company's in that valley and losing money, like, you got the jobs, but they're bad jobs, for whatever reason. And the only reason great people stay with a company is because they believe in the future, right? And so, like you said, you had to paint the picture, open the books, and say, hey, here's where we're at, and here's where we could have been, but here's where we're going, right? And so don't get stuck in the past of what went wrong. Let's get better. Let's be better because of it. And then you had to continue to pour into yourself and make yourself better, right? And get new tools and new processes and come to the table with ideas. So people are like, all right, I like this guy. We're going to roll with him, right? And we're going to all become better because of it. So I think that, one massively important role of leadership is the vision, right? And like the enthusiasm that you cultivate throughout the culture that you're building through your people. The other thing, which was one of my biggest takeaways from talking with you in California, was this book, The Great Game of Business, and the importance of being very transparent and building out the education around the numbers and how the company actually makes money. And what is my role as a, bulldozer operator? How do I drive revenue and profit to the company? And so everyone understands this is how we make money, and this is my job, and I'm going to make the company this way. And then I know I'm going to participate in it. Right. And so The Great Game of Business is a great resource, a great book. I devoured it in like a couple days as soon as Ryan told me about it. And we're in the process of, implementing what that looks like for us, but encourage people to share with their people. That's what makes great businesses is great people. And how do you keep great people? Vision, great leadership, and sharing in the profit. So ESOP, this was the next big thing. I know one other guy who is a very successful businessman. He had a truss manufacturing company here in town, and who successfully did an ESOP, and then it traded again and again. Take me through this. Like, when did this idea come about, and what was that process like actually implementing it?
Yeah, so as we were coming out of the valley and got out of the valley and things were stabilized and we were profitable, I was able to look further down into the future, and allowed me to truly be the visionary, because during it, everyone was all hands on deck that's repairing it. Yeah. So coming out of that, I started thinking, well, how can I reward especially the key leaders that helped me through this and give them a stake in the game? And I was thinking, was it actual ownership, phantom stock, or some version of that? So as I was just thinking about that, I said, as I'm thinking about this, I need to think about the whole big picture. What does business transition look like to Petticoat Schmidt? What does it look like for me? So, I started really thinking about that and studying it. And while I've had a little bit of experience, around the private equity world, I was a little bit aware of ESOPs through reading The Great Game of Business. And so the more I started researching it, the more I started talking to people, and, I didn't see that big, great exit through private equity. Yeah, I know a lot of guys who made a lot of money, but I also saw on the backside, they weren't really happy. A lot of them didn't even make their earnouts. They were kind of lost, right? They just didn't have the purpose. All these things that I kept seeing over and over, and, maybe frustrated with the new owners, disappointed in the breakdown of the culture of what they previously had. And I didn't want any of that. And I definitely, after having gone through the valley of darkness, could not envision telling my team, hey, I've sold the company and I have no idea what's going to happen to the culture. I just couldn't do it. There's no way. So the more I studied it and the more I evaluated, my priorities, my purpose, my vision, my passion, I finally got to the point, I'm like, there's no other solution for me other than selling it to the employees of the company. And after, probably a year or two of really going through that process, and then I started diving deep into the ESOP community and different, advisors and vendors. I really was committed. That's what I was going to do. And I tell people I did it primarily for three reasons. The first, I wanted to continue the culture, as I mentioned. I wanted to continue the culture of the company that we had built and fortified through, the years of being in business, but especially those that, have took us through the valley of darkness. Two, I wanted to create a legacy. I wanted for some of our younger team members to see and believe and understand that Petticoat Schmidt is more than Ryan Schmitt, and it's going to go on beyond him. And then third, I wanted to create wealth opportunities that would otherwise not be provided to the people who help make Petticoat Schmidt successful. And, those three commitments and passions is like, I'm all in. That's what I want to do. And so I went down the road, and we made the transaction in May of 2024 and sold 30% of the company, and did a partial just because it's a heavy lift, right? And, so our surety and those people who helped us through the valley of darkness also understand, like, hey, Ryan, you're still kind of, coming out of this, things were good, but, valuations look backwards and, kind of look at the history of our balance sheet, was beaten up pretty good. So they're very supportive, but they liked my continual ownership, at least until we pay off the debt from the first transaction, and then can go to the second transaction and go to 100%. So, and the more I got involved with the community, the more I really am passionate and just enjoy the entire employee ownership model.
So this is new, right? So 2024, that's a year, depending on when it happened, a little over a year ago. What has been the impact? Like, what have been the biggest takeaways from executing this ESOP and what it's done to your company?
So I was super excited to tell the team, and I like to tell the story of how I did, because we closed in, May of 2024, but by 2023, I knew I was going to do it. We were just waiting to close out the fiscal year of 2023 because we wanted to get that on the books and in the valuation process. So I knew I was going to do it. And every year around November, we have our anniversary party. That's right around when we were incorporated. And we bring the entire company in. We have, a big, bring in food. It's catered. We give out awards, prizes, recognition, raffles. It's a great day. It's really a great day. And so, here we are in November 2023, celebrating 16 years in business, and we had a good year. And as I usually do, I speak to the entire company. And like I said, it's about 220 people at that point. And I said, man, I'm really proud of what we did. We've had a great year. We're really, things are going really well for us. I'm proud of everyone. And it's afforded me to think more about the future. And as I've thought about the future, I made some big decisions. And one of the decisions is that I decided to sell the company. And at that point, you could hear the air leave the room. And I said, but it's really a good thing. I think you guys are going to be really happy. You guys you're going to like the new owner. And in fact, I think a lot of you know the new owner. And in fact, they're here today. And I want to take this opportunity to introduce you to the new owner. And I walked off stage and I had this big mirror. And I just get on stage and I hold the mirror up in front of the whole crowd. And they're like, what the heck's he talking about? I'm like, yep, selling the company to you guys through an ESOP. And so we had not closed at that point. So, and then it was all diving into kind of communicating what that means and how it works, and which was really awesome. And then when we closed, it was another great day, just super excited. And then diving in again to the communication, because, I tell people, I don't want it to be just a retirement plan in the background. I want it to be part of our everyday culture that drives ownership thinking and just that entrepreneurial opportunity for everyone in the company. And then another big milestone is, so annually you get a valuation on the company. The trustee hires an independent valuation company and you get your stock price. And so we made a big deal out of the stock reveal. I was, on a big Teams meeting, the whole company's watching, and there's an excavator in the background and it's running and it's kind of facing it's forward. And, I give a big speech about the stock, and this is the first actual stock price we have. And this is a great opportunity to measure. It's our starting point. And then the machine spins around on the counterweight. It has $42.17. And then we've got these green envelopes going out to everyone. And in the green envelope is everyone's statement, and they see how many shares they have and then the stock price and the valuation of those shares. And so that was a big day. I mean, there was a lot of excited people, and just, seeing what the future could be as we continue to raise the stock price and release those shares. And so that first stock reveal was good. And then we continue to just double down on training and education as much as we can.
Have you seen like more buy-in from like every level, like including like your laborers, of like maybe intellectual curiosity about business and asking about P&Ls and like getting more into the detail of how they drive numbers? Are you seeing some of that?
So we were fortunate, going into the ESOP, we were already doing that financial training and education. So, and I like to say it's like we went into ESOP like on a full gallop versus starting out of the starting blocks. So we had worked on that. But to your point, it's hard to pinpoint like, oh yeah, here's the time where it just changed and people's mindset changed, because it takes a while for people to grasp it and everyone's on a different time frame. But you do see every now and then I'll see a subtle little thing that will be like, oh, there it is, right? There it is. And, where someone will refer to employee ownership or like, oh, that's my stock or something, when previously it wouldn't be mentioned that way. Or, one time one of our mechanics mentioned to me completely unsolicited that he kind of noticed that our equipment's getting taken care of better since we become an employee-owned company. When you got millions of dollars worth of equipment, you're like, oh my goodness, that's it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there are little things here and there that you start to see, and people asking really good questions too. And then one of the things we noticed since we really started spreading the word, communicating and educating about the ESOP, people have become more interested in asking questions about the 401k, which we've had for 18 years. But all of a sudden, people are more interested in that, which I'm like, it's purely unintended consequence. I didn't even think about that, but I'm like, that's great. And I think people are thinking, and I've always tried to push 401k to get people thinking that way. But I think the ESOP is helping people think, what else can I do for my well-being financially? So, you start to see little things like that. And that's just like gasoline getting poured on my fire of passion about employee ownership.
So I've got to ask, because my mind, I'm an optimist by nature and I tend to see the positive side of things, but also I'm a business owner. And so I'm thinking, and I've got to ask, what have been the challenges or negatives, if any, that have come from the ESOP?
It's hard for me to characterize negatives. There's been some challenges. It's a heavy lift to go through the process. It's costly. However, I'll say, but when you compare it to the cost of a transaction through private equity or a strategic buyer, it's still great because there's great tax incentives too that offset a lot of the costs when you use the ESOP. It turns your balance sheet upside down, that you're like, oh man, you got all this debt on the balance sheet, because usually it's a leveraged transaction. So you've got to explain the bankers and bonding people of how that works, and then also handle the cash flow challenges. So it's made our cash flow be, a real critical thing, to service all that debt. And then, just administratively, it requires you to do a lot of things that you wouldn't otherwise do. We've now got an official board. I had to name an independent board member, but I got to pick them. It had to be approved by the trustee. So you have other people involved in the business. Like you said, like I said, there's a trustee, and now we have a outside board member. But I like it. It's like stepping up our game and holding us accountable. So you've got to navigate some of the administrative stuff, some of the cash challenges of it. But, if you got a good team that's doing that in a lot of other areas, which we do, it's just another thing. And you got to learn. It's something that we continue to work on, get involved in the conferences, just all the things that, go around something new that you're learning. And then taking the time to explain it to your people. So it does take a commitment. It does take time. It does take an effort that you would otherwise not do that. But when the rewards are so good, and, I know the rewards largely are, for our employee owners, but I don't know. I find a lot of reward in it you know, hell, I was able to take some chips off the table and, sell them 30% of the company. And so it's helped me and my family. It's helping them. So, it's hard to say negative. I would just kind of characterize it more as just challenges.
Sure. Yep, and that's the entrepreneur optimist speaking out of you. Is the so you have 300 plus employees. Last question I have on this is was there any pushback on like how many shares I got versus how many shares this person got, or like any, because it's funny, you think about these kind of things and it's like a generous type move. It's a win-win, like you said, for your family and your situation, but also for the employees. But like when you start to give people or give people opportunities, sometimes you see greed, right? Get in people's, like, it's just in human nature, it's like, give me more type deal.
Yeah.
Was that at play, or did you have to work through any of those challenges?
Not yet. People ask some good questions. Shares are allocated based on your prorated salary, right? So if total payroll is $100 and you make $10, right, you get a tenth. So that's regulated. We can't affect that, and that's how the ESOP works. So, you explain that, and it's pretty good. There are some good questions about vesting, and but all this is set up and regulated by both the IRS and the Department of Labor, and you can only do so much. Yeah, I ultimately picked the vesting schedule, but like our vesting schedule is very typical. Now I tried to grandfather as many people in as we could. If they had been here a certain amount of years, we gave like an extra year for every 5 years you were here. So people saw that. And so, yeah, we haven't had really any complaints, or, I totally get what you say. Sometimes you give people $100 and they'll complain. It's not all in tens, right? It's like, but yeah, we hadn't had that really at this point. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I know that I've gotten a lot out of this, and I know that someone out there listening, this is interesting because it's different, right? And I think that there are a lot of servant leaders out there who want to give back to their people and not just me. So it's very encouraging to hear. I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit because I know that these two things are equally important to your life as they are mine, and I like to weave them into the conversations as much as I can. And that's specifically around faith and family. So starting with your faith, how have you intersected your faith into your business? And would you consider them like two separate lanes, or is it more like one lane?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all one lane. At the end of the day, it's just doing the right thing, and everything reflects who you are. And if you're doing it doesn't matter if you're in the office, you're out of the office, you're doing the right thing, doing them for the right reasons, leaning on my faith when times were tough. It's almost like, when, I'm throwing my feet on the floor and asking for God's guidance but also accepting that, hey, it's up to him, and just, trying to be the best person I can be. But then also realizing the same thing when things got better and good, it's like, okay, I got to be equally as committed to do the right thing and offer it up to him when those good times come, right? And not be so hung up on it's me, or it's, the wise decisions that I've made, right? It's, kind of like those footprints in the sand, right? And yeah, it's just, I just, what's the right thing, pour into people. And, we're a people first company, and we talk about that all the time. And everything we do is based on, decisions we made, or, the just what's good for people. And, and like this morning, was in a new hire orientation, and we have them every week. And I'm with every single person for the first 2 hours, and tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids, your passions, your interests, your hobbies. And I share mine, and I share the story of the company and our values. And I go through or what we call the plan to win, which is the EOS VTO. And then we talk about ESOP, we talk about all this stuff. And my passion is, just the people. And, another great book, Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman. He talks of every single employee is someone's child, right? And it's funny. Every now and then I'll look out, and look at a group of people that work for us or a person and almost imagine them as a child, to think that, in a way that, like, there's a parent right there who loves the heck out of them, and, good, bad, or indifferent. And there's no reason they shouldn't be felt and treated that way at work. It shouldn't just be at home when they were around their own parents. Right. And that doesn't mean and I think it's a great analogy, because that, like with your kid, that doesn't mean we'll give them, desserts all day long. And right. No, it's tough love. Right. It's almost the same thing. It's like, yeah, I'm going to pour into you, but sometimes it's going to be stuff you might not want to hear, but it's only to make you better. And it's only for the betterment of you. And ultimately the betterment
coming from the right place. And people can feel that, right? Like, if you are giving feedback and it comes from where your heart is in the right place, like you said, it might not be the things that I want to hear right now, but ultimately, that you have my best interest out, then it's taken totally different, right? And people feel that. And it's the culture you talk about. It comes from a servant leadership place in your heart, right? And that's ultimately how Jesus modeled leadership, right? It's by getting on his feet and washing his disciples' feet, right? And giving back and pouring into others. So that's really good wisdom to share. What about your family? So as entrepreneurs, we are probably, and high-performing entrepreneurs specifically who build these big businesses, we're wired differently. And we are committed to our business like it's one of our children, right? Like it is. It's something that you've birthed. It's something that you've, gone all in and risked your parents' house, like you put everything on the table. And sometimes it takes so much of us, but we still have a wife who stood by your side and your kid. And I think you have 2 daughters, right?
Three.
Yep. 3 daughters. And so, taking me back to the Valley of Darkness, what was that like? Were you able to shut it off and be present with your family, or was there some sacrifice there?
I was, very thoughtful about, not bringing some of that home, not being consumed by that while I was going through it. And some days were better than others, right?
Sure.
And maybe that's why it took a little longer to tell my wife. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. There's that. I didn't want her to worry. But then there's that. You're almost admitting failure, right? So there was a couple of reasons there. But I've always been pretty blessed with being able to shut things off in my head once I do come through the front door. I was able to kind of, protect the family. At no point were they ever worried about, finances or anything like that. And I've never been one to, have the big boat or have this or have that. So we were living pretty modestly and still do. And so, it wasn't like we had to cut back in lifestyle, because quite honestly, we weren't living that lifestyle. And for a couple reasons. One, I don't have that palate maybe, but also, I want our girls to have a little bit of challenge in life. Right. And when I say that, I don't, this whole thing has taught me a lot. One of the biggest things is that there's greatness on the other side of adversity. And the best things in my life and the best things in, I'm sure your life and other people's life, well, I know your life because you've shared your story with me, is like, man, you get through adversity, and if you learn from it and it makes you better. And I think about how I create that adversity for our kids to where they can come out on the other side and just be better because of it. And teach them the tools and the mindset of how you handle adversity. And it's tough as a parent because you don't want to see your kids have adversity, right? You want them to have the easy road. But man, having gone through this, it's like, no, I mean, how do I do that? I don't know the answer yet. And maybe, that's a podcast part 2, but so that's always been the challenge. And then, coming out of it, I adopted a philosophy. It's like, I had a home office and I had like dual monitors in there. I can plug in my laptop and all that. And it was probably during the Valley of Darkness, or maybe coming out of it a little bit. I just got rid of all of it. I don't want to have like work set up in the home. Now I still have an office and I'll have my laptop every now and then, but it's not set up to work. I've got my stack of bills, my household bills, and, read some books, but that's about it. And I think that made my wife very, very, very happy, even though I didn't spend a ton of time, but you did. You saw the dual monitors, you saw the whole setup, just got rid of all that and got rid of it. And then, my philosophy is like, my free days are very valuable to me. Time is so, so valuable. So it's more valuable than money. And as you get older, you realize that. And a good year for me is measured in my free days as well as if the profitability of the company. And I'll before the year even starts, I'll map out my entire year and block out my free days. And I used to work on the weekends a little bit, and I didn't even consider it heavy work. It'd usually be I grab my dog, we'd jump in the pickup truck, and the first half of Saturday we'd drive job sites. And my wife, she does some things with her girlfriends Saturday morning, so I'm like, it's not really work. She's busy, but I don't even do that anymore. I block out. I do not work on the weekends. I mean, I might read a book or a little bit and relax, but and then
what's an ideal free day look like for you today?
It's with the family. I love, it's like, let's get out in the boat with the family, create some type of memory, doing something where we're all hanging out and everyone's having fun, planning a trip, whether it's going somewhere further away or a couple of the communities we got right around us that's maybe an hour or two away. It's usually spending time with them. Just usually spending time with them. And
love that. Yeah, and knowing, I think your oldest is in college, right? And then you have a high school aged daughter. So
twins that are in high school. Yeah,
twins in high school. That's right. That's where I thought it was too. So, knowing that they're, in the next however long, it's all God's timing, but they're going to be having families of their own, and so this time is precious, right? And it'll be gone like that, like you said. So that's awesome. One last thing I want to hit on before we end this is, I'm a really big believer in a lot of the things that we talked about today, mindset, people, culture, but I also believe that the more successful people that I've been able to expose myself to, and get to know closely, they're not much different than me or anybody really, but they do a couple things a lot differently. They think bigger and they have better mindset, right, about how they think. And then their habits are a little bit different, right? So they have these non-negotiable habits where they just take action on a couple things, right? And not everyone has the same non-negotiable habits. Like there's, multiple very successful people that have just a little bit different, quirks that work for them. What are your kind of non-negotiable habits that keep you like your bucket filled and keep you performing at your highest and best?
Good question. Yeah, it's like routine is, I think, so important, and a routine that fills your tank, right? It's like, I mentioned you earlier, I was under the weather last week and it just got me out of my routine and I'm back in it, and it's usually I'm up early, 4:30 in the morning and exercising, working on my fitness first thing and structuring it and tracking it. The more I can track, and just build that consistency, so starting out with that, and even with diet now, I'm, tracking all that, tracking my fitness, then, I'm on, I got my calendar full on Outlook, but then I also kind of keep it in writing on my tablet as well too. And I'll just, every week I'll update for the next 2 weeks exactly what I'm going to be doing every day, what my priorities are. And then every day, I write in my journal on those days, I get up, I vision my future. I write down what I'm grateful for. Every day it starts with God's blessings. And I think about my family. I think about my health. I write down, it is, and I'm telling you, that gratitude exercise, I mean, man, that is so powerful, because it's hard to really get down and going through the valley of darkness, and doing that exercise, I mean, was huge. And I think so, expressing gratitude, thinking about my vision every day, and then thinking about the major goals of the quarter. My life, just like EOS and our business, we have 90-day intervals, and have certain things I want to accomplish each quarter, and reflecting on those daily. And then each week, okay, what are some key things I want to accomplish for the week? So just being structured, focusing on my goals, being grateful, thinking about my vision, and this getting up every day. And the more I knock off in the morning, the better the day is. And then work on just being focused with that. And then if I'm off a day, right, as long as you're bouncing back the next day, that's all good. Don't beat yourself up. And, it's if you completely teeter off and you never come back is the type of thing that I think really gets you in trouble, and just, I'll talk about those free days is getting them on your calendar before you schedule your work stuff is important, because otherwise they won't happen. And then you go a year and every year I know exactly how many free days I have, right? Or I had, this year I'm going to be right around like 148, 149. Last year I was 162, right? And other entrepreneur buddies of mine, they're like, what? How can you do that? You're a business owner. I'm like, well, I make it a priority. I put it on my calendar. My assistant knows my free days, right? And she knows, how important they are to me. And, if I have to give one up, like I try and take every other Friday off too. I don't do it all the time, because if I got a big vacation coming up, I might not do it as much. Or if, there's a meeting that I have to go to, I'm like, all right, where am I going to make up my free day? If I'm losing it, right, let's go make it up somewhere else. And, and then fill those free days with things that create memories, especially when it's around family and friends, and, primarily family.
So good. And I say that most everyone has similar habits and maybe a couple different things. This is consistent upon every high performing entrepreneur. It's, routine sets you free, right? It's the gratitude, it's the visualization, it's a fitness, move your body, right? Like I can't think of a better way to alleviate stress than getting moving, right? And it clears your brain, and you think there's science behind it. I'm no scientist, but moving your brain creates creativity, right? For the endorphins that it sets off. And then being super intentional. This is something that I've had to learn recently through Strategic Coach and really kind of, bucked my head on the free days thing, because it's like, man, I read books on Sam Walton and Elon Musk and, all these other, they're not taking no damn free days, but it's like, wait a second, I'm not trying to be that guy. Like I'm trying to, be very involved in my kids' life and coaching all their kids' teams and being there every afternoon, because I know that this time is fleeting. I'm not trying to build the next Walmart, or go to Mars, right? Like know what your success is like for you and then back into that, so really good stuff. Lastly, the show's called Legacy Builders. So I'm curious to hear your personal, Ryan Schmitt's personal definition of legacy, and then what you hope your legacy is.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. When I hang it up and people ask me like, well, when are you going to retire? I'm like, man, as long as I'm doing what I want to do, which is right now, I'm the true visionary. I've got a president and CEO that runs the day to day. As long as I'm doing with what I want to do, which why else would I do that, right? I don't see ever retiring. As long as I have my days where I want to do what I'm doing those days. And so, do I go from CEO to chairman, at some point, or what does that look like? I don't know, but I want to create the legacy where this company has impacted so many people, from employee owners. And I tell people my personal goal is to have the first millionaire retire from this company, and I will see it. There's no doubt about that. We also have done some really great things in the charitable sense, especially coming through out of the Valley of Darkness. One, some of the stuff we never gave up. Like, we're real big supporters of Seamark Ranch. It's a faith-based home for abandoned and abused kids. And I was the chairman of the board for many years and involved in the board for 20 plus years. And, we never stopped our support during the Valley of Darkness on that. And then coming out of the Valley of Darkness about 4 years ago, we started Digger Day, where we bring in kids and families battling childhood cancer, and they get to operate equipment for the day. They're sitting on laps of our operators, and we got a bounce house and zip lines and face painting. And we say we're digging for smiles. And we did it just for the experience at first, but now it's also a fundraiser, and we give money back to the Child Cancer Fund. And so leaving that and those type of things as legacies and the community at large, and then creating just that people first. And I say I want to create a $1 billion culture. And when I say that, I want to continue whether it's in my lifetime or not, we have an enterprise value that's $1 billion, but it's culture. It's the culture that drives it. And, and that shows up in employee ownership. It shows up in complete transparency and sharing of profits. And it shows in, how we, do the things like Digger Day, what that looks like, and Seamark Ranch and these other things that we support, and just creating a culture that's pretty unique in our industry, right? There are so many construction companies that just think people are just a number at the end of a shovel, right? And, they're rarely, if ever, even seeing the owner, never mind spending a ton of time with them, which I do that with a lot of our people, and creating that type of culture that, really is, just not seen a whole lot in our industry.
Man, that's awesome. Well, Ryan, congrats on all your success. It's awesome to hear and learn from a guy like you, a little bit further along in the journey, than me, and to see someone making such an impact and doing it in a, humble, humility driven way, and to keep the priorities aligned, right? Like keeping your people and the culture and the bigger impact, so I know that resonates with the people that listen to this podcast, certainly resonates with me. For anyone listening to this, how can they get a hold of you if they want to learn more about what you're doing or want to be a part of your culture, your company? How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So, checking me out on LinkedIn or petticoatschmidt.com. They can check out our website. Yeah.
Cool. And we'll put a link to both Ryan's LinkedIn and his website in the show notes for anyone interested. Again, Ryan, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate you and appreciate everyone out there listening. Remember, continue to build your legacy one day at a time. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kyle.